The Manor by Kat Webling. Read for you by the author. Every town has their ghost stories, and their haunted places. Some have huge hotels with Golden Age names, full of sordid affairs and midnight rendezvous gone wrong. Some have old farmhouses lost in the backcountry, steeped in the folklore of the hills and the mists of the early mornings. Some have streets you don't walk down at night for fear of what might be listening to your footsteps, and wells in the woods that you always pause to greet before moving on, but never touch. Los Angeles is no exception, of course. There's no shortage of ghosts and specters to haunt the city of angels, no want for dark pasts and dangerous deeds in this hotbed of Hollywood fame and infamy. Everyone knew about the sprawling estate with a glittering view of the ocean and a claim to one of the darkest stories in town. The Manor was infamous, and had been for decades. No one really knew what went down that October night, or in the few days that followed. All we had to go on were a pseudo-reporter's rambling blog on Tumblr and a few short articles with fantastically gruesome headlines. 3 butchered in Beverly Hills Manor. Public despair at the discovery of mayor's mutilated corpse. Unstable general, prime suspect in macabre Manor murders. Everyone had a guess. Everyone had a theory. But no one knew the truth. No one knew exactly why, on the 14th of October that year, the butler from the Manor had come running into the LAPD headquarters, screaming about murder and demons. What everyone did know, however, was that when the police, with sirens blaring, went to investigate the butler's wild claims, they'd been sickened to find 3 rotting corpses scattered around the house, in various states of dismemberment and decay. They said the mayor's body was the worst. He looked like he'd been torn limb from limb by animals, but they never said what kind. Coyotes, people guessed, or bears, though of course that's unlikely. There was barely a bone left unbroken. They found him on the doorstep, and said it looked as if he might have fallen from the balcony on the 3rd floor. Then there was the body of a woman, who was later identified as the wife of the Manor's owner. He was an A-list actor, and she'd been his trophy piece until they separated in a messy divorce the year before. She was found in a small room on the 2nd floor, surrounded by burned-out black candles and a bag of dry herbs and bones. She was practically perfect in appearance, they said, and they'd almost thought they'd found a survivor, until she crumpled under the hands of one of the officers trying to wake her. The autopsy revealed that her insides had been practically liquefied. The last body was perhaps the tamest. It was a detective who'd been reported missing a week before. He'd been shot through the right side and left to die a slow and painful death at the top of the stairs. He was looking at the door, as if he'd watched his killer walk right out into the cool night air. It was horrible, and it was all the media could talk about. Reporters flooded the parking lot of the station as they interviewed and interrogated the butler, but they couldn't get any sense out of him. They talked to his family and friends, but no one knew why he'd snapped. They said he'd been a perfectly sensible man in September. Now here he was, spouting nonsense about forces beyond our control, crossing himself furiously whenever they mentioned the Manor. What was strange was that the butler was insistent, in his rare moments of clarity, that the actor had died. He claimed to have seen him drop from the stair railings, neck broken by an unfortunate landing, and was consistent with every detail of the story no matter how many times he told it. The actor hadn't been seen since the incident, but there'd been no trace of his body when they went into the house. It was as if he'd just disappeared. Everyone assumed he'd faked it somehow and gotten away. The manhunt lasted for years until eventually, he was declared dead as well, another casualty of the Manor massacre. The Manor massacre. The name certainly sounds good, I thought, as I squinted up the dark gravel driveway. It was overgrown with weeds and bramble from years of disuse and neglect. My tires didn't like the uneven ground, and I had to pull to a stop a little earlier than I'd wanted to. A stupid thing had led me to my dismal destination today. A dare. A simple, ridiculous dare among friends, that I wouldn't last the night in the manor, especially on the anniversary. The fatal phrase had done me in. You're not chicken, are you? I was never one to turn down a good dare. $100 was $100, and honestly, I'd never been particularly superstitious. The worst thing I feared was the cold of this year's record-breaking October nights, and the animals that had likely taken up residence in the absence of human habitation. Stepping out of my car and shouldering my duffel bag of provisions, I surveyed the area. My first thoughts were that I wouldn't be lacking in places to camp for the night. That was certain. I trekked up the rest of the long drive, feet beginning to ache from compensating for the shifting pebbles, and up the rusting gate, which, even before I pushed it, I knew would be permanently closed and stuck. I sighed and chucked my bag over it, climbing, with much difficulty, after it, and landing about as gracefully as it had. Excellent, I thought as I rubbed my bruised knee. Only another 1,000 yards to walk before I'm even to the door. Rich people. The front garden was beautiful, even in its wild state. There was something to be said for the mossy stonework and the dry fountains, a kind of dystopian old-world beauty that a city slicker like me seldom gets to see. In the city, things get run down and turn into rubble and drug deal sites. But this place looked like the kind of ruins you'd find in old Roman cities. Stunningly beautiful in a tragic way. Before I knew it, I was at the wide front doors, and I paused for a moment to look at the ground in front of the massive marble steps that led up to the door. There were no hints of what had happened there. No trace left in the tall, moon-washed grass to tell me what the mare had looked like that morning, bent and broken over them like a marionette with its strings cut. If I didn't know the stories, I wouldn't think twice about stepping through the underbrush and up the uncracked steps, which seemed to be the only things untouched by years of solitude. But I did, and my feet found their path to one side. I told myself it was out of respect for the dead. I tested the handles, and fortune was on my side, or so I thought, as I found them unlocked. They were stiff, but I managed to swing the door open with little trouble, and stepped into the lavish front hall. The ceiling was high, giving the hall an oversized, grand scale, except that it was coated in cobwebs. The fine marble busts, mahogany side tables, and dark stone floors were covered in a layer of dust thick enough to be snow. Something moved, and I jumped before catching my reflection again, in the remains of a shattered mirror, shards of which glittered on the small table below it. The sight of my own exercise-reddened face in it gave me an unexpected chill, which I chalked up to the weather hastily, and decided to move on. I came to the main staircase, stopping at the first step to look up toward the landing. This must be the place, then, that had seen the detective's final breaths, had seen a murderer walk away to freedom and the panicked screams of a man running for his life. What had these walls seen, I wondered? If they could talk, what stories would they tell? They'd seen rich parties and scandalous affairs, carried a newlywed couple and a woman with her suitcase in the hand that should have borne a wedding band. What would they tell us about that night? My eyes wandered into the foyer as I passed it, and I was forced to stop and double-take. This time, I accepted the chill as my own reaction. Lines of tape outlined the shape of a body in front of the fireplace, directly below the railing of the second-floor landing. This body wasn't in the right place. Officially, it didn't exist. They hadn't found a fourth body. I took a nervous step toward it. Why wouldn't they report finding this? You would think it would be important to mention to the public that they had found what looked like the detective's work on another murder. Was this where the actor had met his end, I wondered? Was this the place where the detective had found out a murderer and decided to confront him, sealing his own fate? I suddenly found that I didn't want to know the answer. I decided to look for a bedroom to set up in. I returned to the stairs and climbed them by phone flashlight, careful not to touch the railings as I went. Technically, I wasn't supposed to be here. My footsteps were enough of a trace without leaving streaks in the dusty rails as well. As I got to the top of the stairs, my light fell on a dark stain on the wall. I slowed to a stop, staring at it. You don't need to be an expert to put two and two together and conclude that this was a bloodstain. It discolored the wall in such a way that it almost looked like an outline of its own. I had a moment of silence for the fallen man, then moved quickly past his old resting place to the hall beyond, the stairs. Perhaps I'd sleep better if I couldn't see it. I'd underestimated my own detachedness. The room I entered looked as if it had gone through hell. There were books and papers all over the floor. The musty bed was in total disarray, and a table in a little nook to my left had been violently overturned, cracking its surface and scattering a few broken picture frames on the ground. I dared to look at one of them, and found smiling back at me the same faces that had smiled out of the articles proclaiming their deaths and disappearances. You tended to forget, in the horror of it all, that before that night, the mayor, the actor, and the general had all been friends. They'd been vocally supportive of each other for years, attending each other's military events and campaign rallies and movie premieres. The photo in my hand was from the actor's wedding. He kissed his new bride with his two closest friends clapping hands on his shoulders and smiling at him. A candid, comfortable moment during the happiest day of his life. The photo was crinkled, and the glass was missing from the frame, instead glittering around my feet. I brought the photo with me, setting it on the side table as I dropped my bag onto the bed. It landed with a dull thud, as did I when I sat down heavily beside it. I couldn't help but feel that something was inherently wrong with this place, but I brushed it aside. I had no use for silly superstitions and fanciful interpretations of old stains and pictures. After all, this place had sat empty for going on 50 years. The killer was either long gone or long dead. I had nothing to worry about. It was 2:15 a.m. when I squinted at my dying phone's screen, startled out of my uneasy sleep by a loud thud downstairs. It's an animal, my brain told me lazily as my eyes hunted through the darkness of the room by the light of my screen. My heart, however, wasn't listening, and was instead trying to jump out of the frosted glass balcony doors to freedom and safety. Sighing, I stood and stretched. It looked like tonight was going to be an exploring night rather than a resting one. I pulled the real flashlight from my bag, grabbed the extra batteries and stuck them in my pocket, put my phone in there with them, on power-saving mode, and went for a walk. I passed a small room I hadn't noticed before, on the other side of the hall, and stopped to glance in the door, heart plummeting again at the sight inside. It was little more than a closet, the only occupant of which was a small table and chair. The table was covered with a black cloth, and held candle stubs and a stack of cards, as well as a little bag. It took me a moment to connect the dots, and imagine a serenely smiling corpse with closed eyes sitting directly across from me. As I turned to leave, deciding against further exploration, I had the nagging thought that something about the room was off, other than the obvious. It wasn't until I was down the stairs again that I realized what it was. There hadn't been any dust at all in that room. This place was definitely living up to the status of the word manor. It seemed like an endless maze of halls and bedrooms and bathrooms and studies and media rooms and dining halls. Even the kitchen was enormous, and from its windows I could see the vast backyard that seemed more like a jungle, the green-watered swamp of a pool, its oasis, and the dilapidated golf course, its safari plains. I wandered without thinking for the most part, trying to distract myself from the everlasting night with searching games. Where were the drinks stored? I didn't go down into the dark wine cellar. Where were the games played? I didn't touch the royal flush still sitting on the poker table. This worked until I found myself pushing open a door, and the beam of my light fell across what I can only describe as a crime show murder board. Red yarn connected various fading, fragile Polaroids of a bygone age's people, some of whom I recognized from the news, some of whom were strangers to me. Yellowing articles and criminal profiles were thumbtacked to the corkboards that lined the walls. Looking a little closer, I could see that they were not the sensationalizations that I carried in my phone's picture gallery, but various stories of the lives of the victims. An old campaign poster that bore the mayor's reserved, smiling face was connected to an article about one of the actor's movies and its failure in the box office. A front page bearing the title, "Big Game Safari Hunt Gone Wrong for Ghastly General," sat in front of a copy of a marriage certificate. Even the faces of the house's serving staff glared judgmentally back at me, with the records beside them that seemed to ask me my own credentials for entering this dangerous estate. I frowned at the handwritten notes peppering the boards, but I couldn't make heads or tails of it. The most I could get was that the actor had been in some kind of financial trouble that the mayor had been helping him with. The general had always been a bit of a wild card, as the media had been quick to point out while pinning the murders on him, but according to these clips and scrawls, he'd been a dangerous man from the start, and it looked as if the writer was accusing him of the murder of the actor. It was strange, though. None of the confirmed murders were mentioned, and every piece here was as old as the rest of the house's furnishings. This must have been done before all the murders, I concluded, but why? Was that why the detective had been here? That was something no one had ever figured out. No one could explain his presence. Had he been hired to dig up dirt on the mayor and the general? But why? What was the actor trying to find? Or what was he hiding? Another thud, close to me this time, shocked me out of my investigation. And as I recognized the sound of footsteps, I ducked under the heavy executive desk to hide. I was, technically, trespassing, though who owned this land now I didn't know. Perhaps my friends had thought it funny to call the police and send them to pick me up, as a way of getting out of paying me. I decided they'd pay for that later, that I'd up the bet to $150 for the inconvenience, but my main concern in the moment was staying out of sight. I held my breath as the footsteps came into the room. I didn't think about it until much, much later, when I was recounting the tale to my awestruck friends over mediocre school lunches. But from the moment I heard the first steps, high-pitched whine droned in the background, as if some feedback from a cell phone on a cheap radio were being played constantly. It was almost like tinnitus ringing, but outside of my ears, like the sound was being sucked out of the room and pumped back in on a bad audio recording. At the time, I was more focused on not making a noise, as what I assumed was a cop wandered into the room. He stopped, pacing up and down the far end of the room, as if he were studying something on the wall. At one point, he came so close to the corner of the desk that I'd been able to see him in profile, but not being able to use my flashlight without giving myself away, I hadn't seen much other than the outline of a man in a suit, with disheveled hair that fell across the only side of his face that I could see. Then again, it was strange that I could see anything at all. the man seemed to be giving off his own light. An odd hue with a color I couldn't quite pin down, defining some of his smaller features, like the stubble of his jaw and the creases in the elbow of an otherwise immaculate suit. Perhaps he'd brought something with him to light his way, I thought. Some weird lamp or flashlight. Maybe it was his phone screen. Either way, I reasoned that this man must be some kind of detective. Though why they'd send him and not a normal beat cop, I had no idea. By this point, keeping myself from shivering was a constant conscious effort, given the waves of wrongness that seemed to radiate off this man. It's quite amusing to me that you think you can hide by simply staying out of my sight and keeping quiet. I must say your determination is impressive. My heart stopped, and I couldn't tell whether I was going to shit myself or scream. I suddenly knew that I did not want this man to find me, no matter what, and that if he came over there, I wouldn't be fast enough to run. But he didn't seem to care that I was there. It sounded more like he wanted to acknowledge my presence, as if out of a want not to be rude in ignoring me. He continued to pace, talking softly, but the sound still carried. Stay, if you like. Read all of these old lies. Make guesses, if you will. Everyone else seems to have done so already. Perhaps you'll get closer to solving the famous Manor massacre. I could practically hear the cold smile leave his voice then, and although it makes no sense, I would swear forever that his voice split and broke and sounded like several people at once talking when he spoke next, covering his words with other conversations, laughter, and faint, faraway screams. Or you could go now. Forget that you ever saw this place, and pretend it's just another mystery tale to tell your little friends while you waste your time in your silly little lives. Suddenly, his voice was back to the soft rumble of before. It is, of course, your choice. I suppose I'll leave you to it. His footsteps traded back toward the door, and though I shouldn't have been able to hear it, the same soft whisper bid me good night. He never said another word that I heard, and it seemed to take forever for him to actually leave. When he was finally gone, I stayed hidden for another long minute, until I was sure he'd left the house, though I ignored the fact that I never once heard a door open and the footsteps had stopped at the end of the hall. I stood shakily, flicking my flashlight on again, and froze. There was only one set of footprints in the room, and they were the diamond-patterned prints of my own chucks in the dust on the old wood floor. I don't think I've ever run faster in my life or broken more rules of the road than I did as I got the hell out of that place. I didn't even bother going back up to the bedroom for my bag. For all I know, it's still there. Everyone always asks me what I think I saw. Was it a ghost? A demon? Was it the shade of the mayor or the actor? All I can respond with is, I don't know. I don't know what I saw, or what spoke to me, or what those words meant in the long run. And I'm certainly no closer to a positive ID of the murderer than anyone else is. But there are certain things I never say, like how I don't think the butler was mad anymore, and how it was almost as if I could hear voices calling to me as I left, the strange glow never fully dissipating as I scrambled back over the front gate and shakily started my car with the keys I'd luckily left jammed into my pocket, not even daring to turn the headlights on until I made it back off of the estate, just praying and following the gravel path back to the main road by memory and feel. If you want a solid opinion, then here's what I think. I think I never want to know what I encountered, and that I never want to encounter it again. I think I'm going to follow his advice and let the mystery stay unsolved. After all, it makes for a damn good story, doesn't it?